This is The Bagel Report, a podcast exploring Jewish representation and identity in popular culture, with your hosts Esther Kostanowitz and Aaron Ben Moshe, and now a production of J, the Jewish News of Northern California.
Hey Esther, LA may be all abuzz because of the Oscar nominations, but in San Francisco, the Jewish Film Institute is gearing up to present the 10th annual Winterfest, February 25th and 26th at the Vogue Theater.
The weekend-long festival showcases 9 documentaries and narratives from local and international filmmakers that offer a kaleidoscopic view of Jewish life and culture.
So join JFI for 2 exciting days of local premieres, community conversations, and contenders for international awards.
You can get your tickets, passes, and film information at jfi.org/winterfest.
And now back to the Bagel Report.
Hey, Aaron.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. I've been down a rabbit hole and back again.
Me too. For everyone listening, most of you will know what we're talking about this week. It's a continuation of You People, the biggest movie on Netflix right now that is shaking up the Jewish and non-Jewish community. According to Deadline, You People topped the charts for 2 weeks, had more than 65 million viewing hours, and is in the top 10 in 90 countries.
It's crazy.
It really is.
What was that? It said more than 65.6 million viewing hours. But that's just this week. And the previous week, it had 55 million.
Yes. So this romcom follows a white Jewish guy who falls in love with a Black Muslim woman. Chaos ensues when parents meet for the first time.
Right. And if this plot sounds familiar to you, it should, because it's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, or Guess Who, which was a remake of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Obviously, the dinner table is a place where people can come into conflict with one another, and that certainly happens in this movie.
That's right. And what have the critics said? Has anyone said anything about this, Esther?
Oh, no, it's been silent. No, basically, every time you think you've seen all of the possible headlines and criticisms about this movie, there's more that come out. So it started with how it's resonating in the Jewish community, how it's resonating in the Black community, whether it's funny or not, whether it needs to be funny or not, because it's a Netflix rom-com, and are those actually high quality anyway? Some people think that the leads don't have any romantic chemistry. Some people are saying, stop being so sensitive, it's satire. Some people are saying, don't be so sensitive, it's just stupid, and obviously in the Jewish community, there's also a lot of concern over the pot shots that it seems to take at both Jewish and Black characters, concern about whether these kinds of things just thrown out in the middle of a movie in the context of comedy will encourage anti-Semitism, which is already on the rise. So basically, what we're saying is people have feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to run down a couple of the headlines and quotes for you so that you have an idea of what this range really looks like. Writing in the J, Andrew Essenstein calls it a step back for Black-Jewish relations that reinforces the idea that Jews and Black people belong to completely different worlds, and also that this idea erases Black Jews, such as Lauren London, who is the actress who plays Amira. Her father is Jewish. So the film is ultimately another step back for both communities. Lauren had told People on a podcast that she grew up with her dad, who's Jewish, and her mom is Black, and that she liked finding the Jewish elements of the story in her character. So she said she liked that the other family was Jewish because it was also some stuff that I got to learn via being in the movie that I hadn't known. And we do definitely want to know specifically what she learned from this movie about Judaism, which is, some people I'm sure will say is its own problem. We also had Cynthia Silverstein in the JTA writing that the movie wasn't funny at all to my Black and Mexican family. And she said that the portrayals were oversimplifying racial binaries. And I think that that's, a lot of people think that's true. I think that even though we're a little bit less critical, we also do think that there was oversimplification happening here because this is a Netflix rom-com. And what are rom-coms? Are they deep works of intense satire? Usually not. Usually they are, they go for the jokes and they go for the rom and they go for the com.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to end with the headline in Kveller which we also quote a lot here because Kveller is very aligned with us in terms of our pop culture awareness. And they said that You People is bad Jewish representation at a really terrible time. So that also left me with a question of like, when would a good time be for bad Jewish representation? Like 5 years ago when anti-Semitism was only sort of around? I mean, 10, 30, everything's on a continuum, and bad representation is never at a good time. And I think also, talking about representation as we often do, this climate, this current moment that we're in also has more positive representation examples that we talk about, and we'll talk about in the weeks ahead, perhaps even next week. Broad City, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Curb Your Enthusiasm, which you can argue about, Maisel, which people argue about. So anyway, the point is that there's a lot more to Jewish representation than just You People.
Yeah. And I want to start, as we get into our personal thoughts now on the movie, I want to start with something that I was using a lot this week, and honestly, the last couple weeks since we saw the movie before it went out to the masses. I want to quote the brilliant relationship building cohort Newground, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change. I want to quote them by saying, "This is not consensus building. I just want to hold space for multiple things to be true at once, since this movie was multiple things at once and they were true for everyone who saw it. Like everyone who has a feeling about this movie, those feelings are valid and that's true. And I just want us to hold space so that we're not telling you how you need to feel about this movie, or that you're dumb, or that you're wrong, or that you're stupid. It's just, can a lot of things be true at once? And can one movie be the reason all of these things are coming up? And I think yes. So I want to go into that space when we have this conversation. So join us.
I love that you learned such great things from being a Newground fellow. And I want to just repeat your commitment to keeping this space like a place where multiple things can be true at once. As you know, our friend Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof, when he was considering things, he would say, on one hand, this hand, and on the other hand. And then he has a breaking point where he's like, there is no other hand, right?
Yeah.
That's not what this space is about. Even though a lot of our colleagues have panned this movie and condemned it really unequivocally, I think it's easy to look at a piece of culture and have an emotional reaction to it. Like you like it, you hate it, it's offensive, it's funny, it's hilarious, it perfectly represents you, or you're worried about what people will think when they see it and they'll conflate you with a person the same ethnicity or cultural background that's depicted in the film. It's a harder exercise to look at the thing itself as an indicator of where we are and where we might be going, and identify the challenges so that instead of, or in addition to, if you like, taking offense, we can course correct, hold the necessary discussions with everybody at the table who needs to be and wants to be, and call people in for the discussion instead of calling people out for what they did wrong. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to that point a little bit, because I know that this is language that comes up in these kinds of space, some of the spaces, the cohorts that you've been a part of.
I mean, I was a fellow for Newground, and I think one of the most important things that I learned about it is that when you are meeting people, you are not trying to get them to side with you. Like sometimes there are situations where you are persuading people, but it was all about learning where people are and learning why they feel this way. And once you truly understand where a person is and where they're coming from, then you can be an ally for them. And that is, it's not consensus building, it's relationship building. It's, I know you as a person, I'm going to fight for you. And I may not agree with you on everything, but I care and I know you. And I know that when you say this, you don't mean this. And I think one of the biggest problems of this movie is that we don't get any of that. And so it is really unsettling to a lot of people who I think wanted to see a great movie where this worked and this was a magical land where there was relationship building. Wow, what a great movie for Black people and Jewish people. Wow, what a step forward. And really, we didn't get that at all. Because, it's a rom-com and sometimes you only get surface level and sometimes you get a word and then you move on and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Right. So I think it's more like letting people in and not calling people out on where they are and where they're at in the moment that they watch this movie.
I found that when we were talking to Todd last week, we got a really great lens on what it was like to be there for those 2 days of filming, essentially. But, as we said in the previous episode, like he wasn't in charge of the script, but I'm wondering if any Jewish people aside from Jonah Hill looked at the script, if any Black people who identify as Muslim looked at the script other than Kenya Barris. And when you take this one scene, which is the dinner scene, which is like where like the conflict really comes to a head, I was really wondering what the writing process was for that. Like, did they write it together? Did one of them write a first draft and then the other one revised it? Or did they sit in a room and Jonah voiced the white family and Kenya voiced the Black family? I kind of want to know and don't want to know the answers to those questions. Mm-hmm. But, there's a lot of conversation online about how such a scene gets written. And I really wish that in the interviews that Kenya Barris has been doing, that he would have addressed the creation of this scene, kind of like those anatomy of scene things that people do. Yeah. Or like after you watch an episode of The Last of Us or whatever, they come up and they tell you how the episode was made. Mm-hmm. I really want that director's commentary, essentially, like we used to get with all the DVDs where you could put it on and they would just narrate the film and you'd feel like the filmmaker was there with you in the room. Yeah. The definition of offensive is so different from person to person. It's why not everybody likes the same comedians, right? Not everybody likes the same newspaper. And, from community to community, something might be offensive or not offensive, funny or not funny. And also because, the Jewish family in this movie is a particular kind of Jewish family. Mm-hmm. They are not every family, Jewishly speaking, right? And it's entirely possible and probable and likely that this brand of Judaism, Jewish family in Los Angeles, is very familiar to Jonah Hill. Mm-hmm. And so that's why he wrote it this way. Mm-hmm. If he had written a family that was modern Orthodox, we would be complaining that he wasn't modern Orthodox. And so therefore he represented that family wrong, right? Right. So who among us could create the film that is so universally agreed to represent Jewish people in a realistic, relatable, authentic, inclusive of all experiences perspective? I mean,
when you find them, let me know.
Should we do it?
I can't wait to see what they're doing. No, because even we're going to get things wrong. Because I think we have this hot take, Esther, that we liked parts of this movie. We thought we kind of enjoyed it. We were laughing in the audience. Did we like all of it? No, but I think we should say what we liked about this movie and then go into a deep dive on what we didn't like or what we thought was not ideal. Because I don't think anyone is going to make a perfect movie about the Jewish experience. So let's talk about it.
One of the things that I really liked about going to see this movie in the movie theater was that we went basically the first day or 2 days that it was out in the theater. Mm-hmm. And both of us were in small theaters. We talked about our experiences. And we were in very mixed audiences where people were laughing at different parts of the movie. And also, we didn't have everything in our heads that we now have in our heads about like how everybody hates it and, or depending on which community you're in, you either like it or hate it, or, you just thought it was fine or you thought it was damning and damaging. But we got to see it that first weekend and our experience with it was really pure, I think. Yeah. It's kind of actually upsetting that there is so much discourse around it that people may have made up their minds about what it is before they even see it. And once you have something in mind, that's what you look for. It's not to say that those are made up things. All of them, almost all the headlines, I agree, are present in some ways in the film. But I just wanted to say that I'm really happy that we got to see it before everybody else. And I would like to urge people like who haven't seen it yet to maybe look at it with an open mind. And in fact, if you've gotten this far into the podcast and you haven't seen it, maybe you just pause and go watch it for 118 minutes and then come back. And then we can talk to you about the things that we loved and the things that we didn't love.
Yeah. So, okay, you said something you liked about the experience. Okay, so what's one thing you liked about What's a scene or a character or a moment that you liked in the movie?
I think the first thing that I really super loved is Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Like,
Yeah.
She is outstanding. I love her love for her son, that not for a minute did she stand in the way of his happiness. Like, she just wants him to be happy. Like, she tried to set him up with a Jewish girl, but that didn't work. And she met Amira, and she's lovely and great. They're so happy. She's so happy for him. So that was great.
You know what? I'm glad that this movie wasn't, you have to win me over. Like, she did genuinely, in like a fetish kind of way, love Amira, even though she didn't really know anything about her. But it is nice to see the love as opposed to, oh no, you have to meet my my mom, you have to get her approval. That was a nice change of pace.
I really did love that. I actually thought that I didn't really love the way Ezra talked to his mom. His mom was lovely and really trying so hard. So anyway,
okay, stay on the things.
Julia
that we
Louis-Dreyfus.
Okay, that's what.
Stay on things. Stay on target. Stay on target.
I actually liked, while we're talking about the family, I liked the sibling chemistry between Amira and her brother and Ezra and his sister. Like, I love that there were sweet moments where they would confide in each other and then all of a sudden, like, completely turn on each other and push them in front of buses, not real buses, metaphorical ones. It felt very real and sibling-like, and I wish I had more. I wish there were more sibling scenes. I thought they were really fun.
I totally agree. It's actually on my list as well, especially the back and forth between Ezra and his sister in the Yom Kippur service. It was really just so awesome, like the two of them together. Yeah, I'm wondering if there was more of her character that just didn't make it into the final cut. I just feel like she's a rising star, that Molly Gordon.
Yeah.
So I felt like she was underused.
Okay. What else?
What about the location?
Oh, yes. Okay. We always talk about how some of the best rom-coms of all time are always set in New York. And it's like, okay, we get it. New York is its character. But how great was it that there was a movie that took place in LA? Yeah,
it was great. I don't know a lot of those places, but
really?
I think that's part of what makes this film so LA centric, is the fact that it's really grounded not just in one or two places, but in like two different communities. In addition to the challenge of negotiating these two cultures, the locations change as well. And in some ways, it's a Brentwood versus Baldwin Hills thing, because Ezra's family lives in Brentwood, and Amira's lives in Baldwin Hills. So you get locations that are specific to those neighborhoods.
Right.
That's also part of building the reality of this, and also showing the Skirball Center, so it is really interesting to see LA represented in that way. And you're right, it is usually like New York, or like occasionally you'll get a movie about Chicago or something, or San Francisco. They'll show you the bridge and you'll know and hills, and you'll know you're in San Francisco. So one of the things that marks LA is the fact that there are so many types of people who live here, and so many different neighborhoods have different characters. So it's great to have that in this film.
And also, I think something I kind of liked is that it was also cultural Jewish LA. Like, yeah, you have the Skirball Center, but you may not know what it is if you've never been there. But also, it's not like they were at, a very iconic synagogue. They went to a deli that's Jewish style. It's not even kosher. So it felt familiar in one Jewish way, but not necessarily all of them. And I like that specificity. I also want to end out the things I liked with something that people didn't like. I liked Shelley. Like, I know we just talked about her, but I liked her for the good and the cringe. She felt very familiar to me. She felt like someone who is trying to show off her wokeness in a genuine way. And it's kind of coming off as a lot and kind of tone deaf. And even the way she's kind of pushing things on to her Jewish son, it felt like a community I grew up in Michigan. It felt like people I've met in LA. Not to say that these are bad people, just that I know characters like this who are kind of stereotypical, but they're real. And right. I enjoyed seeing that. Okay, so now what are the things that we didn't love?
Oh, God. Well, this could be a long conversation, but we're keeping this part short as well. I think the main thing for me, and I do have two others, but the main thing for me, which I want to talk about first, is that the conflict is on screen, but the resolution is off screen.
Yes.
So Shelley and Woody Akbar, whatever his name is, Amira's dad, apparently had some sort of magical conversation off screen that we never see and never hear about that helped them find some sort of agreement enough to try to get their kids back together, right?
Yeah.
So, but I don't know, what magic was this and how long did it take? Was it an hour conversation? Did they meet at a coffee shop? And did they go to shul together? Or did she go to a mosque? You know, like, did they consult the Black Jewish Alliance, which is the Black Jewish Entertainment Alliance? I don't know where they are. Or did they enroll in some sort of, you know, consensus building workshop together? But, you know, I think it would have been really great to see that, but it also would have been impossible to write because it requires them to bridge a gap that has been built up as uncrossable. If they had the answer and put it on screen, then people would be like, oh, there's the answer. Now we know how our communities can get along. But we don't have the answer off screen, so they can't have it on screen. But I do like that. I guess this is turning into something I like, that even if they couldn't bridge the white, Jewish, Black, Muslim gap, they could take steps toward one another for the happiness of their children. That's really great. But it comes out of nowhere and is essentially non-instructive to managing such conflicts in real life because we can't see the negotiation.
But that's how all rom-coms, in some ways, this movie is exactly like every rom-com that you've seen before. You know, it spend so much time setting up how it's impossible. And then all of a sudden at the last second, it's all possible and hooray. And let's wrap up and let's end on some catchy song that everybody knows. And there's a wedding maybe, and everyone's laughing and no one's actually speaking. And then fade to black. So
tell us about those catchy songs, Erin.
Well, right. And even in this moment, you're like, that's the song they went with. That's the one. Not like it's a perfect day or whatever. But anyway, I agree with you. I feel like, why didn't we see that? And it's also very possible that Jonah Hill is not equipped to answer that, right? Like, we didn't see a lot of authentic moments, but we saw them both processing it away from each other. So they both came to this realization on their own. And then they decided to meet and set up an entire wedding where everybody else could magically get on board with them, which is great because they're both the matriarch and patriarch of their community. So if they can get everybody on board, then there is hope for them. Building on that, something I didn't like is that they made interfaith, interracial unity seem impossible.
Yeah.
For most of the movie, it felt very old and outdated in the thinking that Jews and Muslims can never be friends and white people and black people can never understand each other. It's like, what are you talking about? Sure, they can. Ezra's whole podcast is about trying to understand the steps that need to be taken so that we can understand each other. Like, where's that? Where's that knowledge being dropped throughout the movie? Like, we don't really get that. Like, he says he's all about the culture and he's trying to prove that he does have a respect and he wants to, you know, embrace it. And, you know, he just genuinely loves this girl, but then we don't see it from anybody else. So how is anyone in the audience going to buy it? And it really is sad. Like, I remember seeing at one point they break off their engagement and I'm really sad. I was bummed. Like, for whatever I thought about the face value rom-com, I was sad that they couldn't work their differences out because it made me feel like people are going to think that this can't be attainable when there are so many groups of people in this world trying to make it attainable by doing the work. So not every movie is going to show you doing the work. You're going to have to find it in literature and in your community. But I was just bummed that they didn't even try, you know?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things where I think you could end with, they didn't even try.
Yeah.
So I think that one of those things is that we see that neither Amira nor Ezra seems to incorporate their culture into their home. Mm-hmm. We know Ezra is very obsessed with the culture, but he does not mean the Jewish culture. Mm-hmm. And I don't see it represented in his home. It's represented in his podcast banter with Sam J, but like, you know, it's not really clear that he cares much about it. He just knows that's who he represents on that show, on the podcast. But I think they also missed an opportunity for a Muslim representation because it would be great to see when she identifies as Muslim and Ezra asks her, so you're really Muslim? And she said yes. And we never see why it means anything to her other than the fact that her parents are pretty hardcore.
And a moment to make a bacon joke, to which Jonah Hill says, I never told you I was observant. I never tried to be a Jewish, I never tried to force what I wasn't onto you. He genuinely was like, since when is this important to you? Like, let's talk about it.
Right.
And that, there was a moment there that could have been, well, this is what I like. Okay, well, this is what I like. Okay, let's incorporate it, right? Like what last week Todd was talking about in Hebrew Helpers. And that didn't happen.
Well, also eating bacon doesn't mean that you're not interested in Judaism. Like
exactly.
Again, it's about two things can be true.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if he were a more modern Orthodox character and he was eating bacon, then it makes no sense. But, it's here, I think they just missed an opportunity to give us depth and meaning in the fact that they're holding up these religious practices as oppositional, but we don't know why it's oppositional because it doesn't seem important to either one of them.
Mm-hmm. And on that, one of the things I didn't like that came out of this movie is that I just saw different people starting to call Jonah Hill self-hating as a writer, as a character that he played. And I don't think that's fair. I feel like he maybe feels a certain way about his Jewishness. These are the things that he associates with his Jewishness, like the mom who's trying to set him up with someone who's not Jewish, the once-a-year Jews who sometimes say something weird at shul that he's not connected with. Like, maybe there are parts of these things that are real to him, and he just put up a mirror and wanted others to see that too. And I think we talk about Jewish representation all the time, and you can't just be happy when religious observance is shown. Like, there are so many ways to be Jewish, and he's showing a way that he is Jewish. This is what being Jewish means to him. And you may not like it, and it may be something we're uncomfortable seeing, but like, that's truth to him. And a lot of people that I saw on Twitter and Instagram and in their reviews on TikTok, they resonated with this character, the tattoo-wearing, bacon-eating, cultural Jew. And that has to be celebrated. Like, or at least acknowledge that and that's included. True.
Yeah. It's part of the mosaic of who we are as a world.
It's his truth. Like, why can't it only be one, another new ground term? Why is it a zero-sum game?
Zero-sum sounds like it's math, and I did not sign up for that. So I'm just going to pivot to tell you.
All or nothing.
No, I got it. But I think I want to also say that I could have done without almost everybody at the Yom Kippur after party. I don't know what that was.
That was very strange.
It's not clear. Was it a break from shul? I don't know. But like, everybody they encountered was just like gross. And I didn't love that.
Yes. And some of the jokes were a little weird. One of the jokes I did like was, I thought the Holocaust ring box was a little funny. Like, of course, a Tiffany blue box is going to be a little interesting when it was from the Holocaust. And some people really hated that joke, but I also found it interesting because some of my friends who hated the Holocaust ring box joke really loved the Larry David Holocaust Museum walking out with the shoes joke. And so for them, if you're listening, I implore you to wonder, why do you like one and not the other?
I mean, but again, that also comes to the point of everybody has different reactions to things. And you might think that Larry David taking Holocaust shoes from the Holocaust Museum because his shoes are uncomfortable, that is okay, because we accept that Larry David is a, misanthropic character within this series.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're supposed to like Ezra Cohen, then the question is, how does this land for somebody like him? And it's just really hard to know, especially with the Holocaust. It's one of those things that no one can agree on how to represent unless you represent it the way it happened, like on the page, on the stage, to have it like really based on actual real things and no extra scenes of how it might have gone, but we don't know because people weren't there. Anyway, there's a whole lot of stuff like that's objectionable.
And there was another joke at the dinner table that when I saw it at the movie theater, I was the only one that laughed. And I liked the Farrakhan joke, like we're big believers in our friend Farrakhan who gave us this, beautiful piece of clothing. And I laughed because it's like, oh, of course, like you're in a Jewish home. And when someone says Farrakhan in a positive way, that's going to make people uncomfortable. And then I was the only one laughing. And then it occurred to me that unless you have vast knowledge of Judaism, Jewish life, Jewish nonprofit, the Nation of Islam, the anti-Semitism that's associated with his rhetoric, like the joke may not land for everybody. It's like a deep cut joke. And then it's never brought up. Like after they say Farrakhan, you either get it or you don't. Julia Louis-Dreyfus says, oh, we know what he said about the Jews. But then you actually never hear what he has said about the Jews or the manifestos in the Nation of Islam and the rhetoric that's been used in ways that portrays the Jews in a very specific way. And there's none of that because it's, again, a rom-com. Don't get too much. Stay within the lines.
Don't think too much. Like if you smell something burning because you're thinking too hard.
Right. And so it's a bummer because then it just becomes like this yelling match. It just feels like it's a who had it worse, and you're never going to have a winner there. Like, why are you saying I suffered more? Like that just feels, it's just used as a way to show, oh man, we're never going to work out. Look, our parents hate each other. Like they're saying, get the slavery receipts out of my purse. And she's saying, yeah, well, the Jews and slavery and the Holocaust, they're all kind of similar. We're so similar. We should be bridging together our similarities. And it just feels like a runaround of, ugh.
Yeah.
This isn't going anywhere.
Some people call that the oppression Olympics.
Yes.
So I think that's, years ago, I wrote a book about the Holocaust. It was part of a series, an educational series for kids. And there was a project manager overseeing it, and she taught us that there's no use in comparing suffering because there's just, it never yields anything good.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about, acknowledging people's suffering. You have this suffering, you have this suffering. Honestly, we're not trying to mesh them and draw them as equivalent, although there may be parallels. But again, because this is a rom-com, it's limited in its capacity to make change societally, if in case people didn't hear that the first time. And I think that also the conflation of Nation of Islam with Islam is something that I'm also a little concerned about because, I'm obviously not an expert in Islam. I know that the Nation of Islam is a subsegment, and that this segment has very different and more radical beliefs than about the role of the Jews in the slave trade, about the role of the Jews in the world. And so I'm worried about that distinction getting lost.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I've a lot of friends of mine and people that I follow who practice Islam. They haven't seen the movie, and maybe it's because they don't know that. Maybe I don't know. I'm not sure why. I've been looking. There've been a couple places where they're like, "Hi, friendly reminder: these are not the same thing." Nothing like I haven't seen a ton out there, and I'm surprised that there's not more of a reaction like, hey, look, we're represented, or, oh God, no, This is not how we feel.
Right. Well, I think that, one of the things that I started making a list at some point, which I don't even know if I shared with you, quite honestly.
Maybe.
Maybe. It's possible.
It's possible.
I sometimes share things with you. I think that there are things that I would have loved to see as a result of this movie. And I think that can still happen, right? So I think that having some sort of a community conversation, maybe Newground and the Black Jewish Alliance get involved, and we have a chavruta, partnered learning program between people who are white and Jewish and people who are people of color who are Muslims. Maybe we have instead of a book group, we just watch this movie and then we have like honest responses to it for 5 hours. Or, if you ever watched anything on Amazon and they have that on Amazon Prime and they have that X-ray thing that gives you like a pop-up with links to who the actors are. Like I would like that, except for facts, kind of like pop-up video style with factoids that debunk the stereotypes, or a director's commentary, as I said before. All of those things would be helpful, but that's not why people watch rom-coms. So I think we'll have to wait for this to be part of whatever the trends are for film and Jewish representation in the 2020s. And we'll have to circle back in 2030 and look at it as as a collection to see if this was an anomaly or if people in response to this created their own stuff that's different. I think it's kind of like a time will tell situation.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it would be more of a drama rom-com, where there are more dramatic moments with big laughs as opposed to trying to be funny. Overall, I thought the movie was fine. I don't know if I'm going to tell people to watch it on Tu B'Av or Valentine's Day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was okay. I mean, it was good. There were moments where I was laughing. There were good things. There were bad things. But I think what makes me bummed about this movie is that kind of what you said, you wanted more for it than what you got. And some people really do feel this is going to set back the communities instead of move them forward. And I'm glad that people are worried about it, because I think that means that they want to bridge the gap. So they're looking for things that might stop that. But I also hope that we keep coming back to this, Esther. People keep asking us, is this movie good for the Jews? And I think collectively we both hate that question.
We do. I mean, the truth is that good for the Jews is a format that really, or is a formulation of a question that doesn't really capture it, because as we said, there's really there's nothing we all agree on. It's we say Jews, two Jews, three opinions.
Exactly.
And there's no hope in getting any, plural number of Jews in the world to agree on one movie that represents them, right?
And I mean, even so, the fact that for as many people who hated the movie, so many Jewish people felt seen in this movie, and we're constantly asking people, when did you first feel seen? And the fact that Black Jews, some Black Jews resonated with this movie because Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character is someone they confront in Jewish spaces a lot. That has to mean something, right? We can look at this movie and learn from it. And maybe that's what makes people really uncomfortable, is that they don't like how these characters are being perceived. And maybe a little of that discomfort is that there's some truth there. And so exploring that some of these things that make people uncomfortable are also real for someone else, I think is an opportunity for us as a Jewish community to go, okay, what have we learned in this pandemic era of wokeness and post Black Lives Matter movement in Jewish spaces, and really embracing Jews of color and other people who are because interfaith relationships are becoming more popular in the Jewish community too. And maybe we use this movie as a way to grow and not just shut it down because it's so bad. There's nothing good about it.
Right. I think that's one of the reasons that, I also think that people who watched the opening 10 minutes, thank you, by the way, because I know that you were just looking for me and Aaron in the synagogue scene. Thank you for your support. But people who watched the first 10 minutes and were like, this is not for me, turn it off. That's fine. I mean, we are welcome to walk away from our TVs or our watching devices at any point. And that's fine. But I want people, when I'm conversing about the movie, I want to talk to people who have seen the whole thing. So if you're interested in talking to me about it or Aaron about it, I think I can speak for you that you should watch the movie and then talk to us and tell us why you hated it or think it's bad for the Jews. But I want to just, kind of talk about this again, the question of whether it's good for the Jews. To say something is good for the Jews means it's good for all Jews. And who can, what would that thing be? I guess freedom, happiness, sunshine?
Yeah, but then you have to remember that we suffered, so you can't be happy all the time.
Right. Right. Exactly. That's a deep cut Crazy Ex-Girlfriend reference for those of you who are listening. But basically, we all have things in common, even if we have significant differences, and we all develop a relationship to Judaism and to Jewish ideas that differs depending on where we grew up or who our parents were or what kind of communities or education we have, and whether Jewish identity was presented to us as something we needed to hide or embrace or celebrate or downplay, all of that kind of stuff. And this leads to richness and diversity and new ways to look at old texts and traditions. I don't even need to tell, probably anybody who's listening to this knows that there are organizations like Reboot and Haggadot.com and all these places where you can find different ways to connect to ritual through a contemporary lens, through a lens that's personally meaningful, can also help to make that Judaism meaningful. So I think that there's just a lot of things to learn about each other. And I think that it requires a certain willingness to say, I don't know, and I want to know, or I want to learn, and I want to be respectful, and all of those things. And I think that I was wondering, what this movie would have been like if the white character had just been white and not Jewish, and the Black character had not been a Farrakhan follower. I would love to see what that conflict is. And the question then becomes, what layer did the faith angle add? I wish that the Jewish portrayals had been a little bit more nuanced. I wish that the conversation, as we talked about at the dinner table around Farrakhan, had been explained instead of, Shelley just saying, I know what Farrakhan said about the Jews. That's great, but the audience probably doesn't and may not even register for them, like you were saying, unless they have a previous understanding of who Farrakhan is. So I just want to say that what I resent about this film is really its missed opportunities to promote healing and to convey accurate information. And what I'm coming away with from all of the conversations about this is a reminder that representation is relative. What's true for somebody is probably not true for everyone and may not be true for anyone else, quite frankly. As I've said before, and I will likely say again until people tell me to stop saying it, is that representation, when there's only one example, then the entirety of representation is resting upon the shoulders of that one piece of culture. But when you have multiple authors, when you have multiple initiatives and portrayals, that way is the way that we get to Good for the Jews, because it indicates that Jews aren't just one thing.
Yes.
And I think that's what makes contemporary Judaism so interesting. This opportunity to learn from other people about what's meaningful to them and why, and to create relationships with people who are different from us.
100%. So to sum up, if you haven't seen this movie yet and you wanted us to break down or kind of prep you for what you're going to see, we hope you go see it. We hope to hear from you. Let us know what you think, what you felt, why you felt that way. And thanks for listening to us this week.
We'll be back next week.
This has been The Bagel Report, a production of Jay, the Jewish News of Northern California, and a part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network. Thank you to Lev Gringaz, our producer from Jew Folk Inc., David A.M. Walensky and Andrew Essenston, and Danny Lipsky for creating our logo. You can find us wherever podcasts are listened to. Connect with us on social, on Twitter, at Esther K., at Eben Moshe, and at The Bagel Report. On Instagram, at Esther Kostanowitz, at Eben Moshe, and TBR the Pod, and by emailing us at thebagelreport@gmail.com. Now go and watch something interesting, and maybe we'll talk about it next time on The Bagel Report.